Hey guys, so welcome back. What is real wealth in Korea? What makes you really, really rich? Like, you may have seen some of those rich characters in K-dramas, and usually they're the scions or owners of big business conglomerates called chaebols. But what really makes them wealthy? How does that actually work? And how did they get there, and how did they keep their power? If you've seen the latest hit drama right now, Marry My Husband, it features a chaebol owner. And so it's kind of brought back this, that Cinderella story that made a lot of K-dramas famous. And it's an amazing drama. But this thing is not about the fictional drama or the fictional chaebol owners. We'll get to that drama review later, but we're going to take a look at how Mr. Samsung, yes, Mr. Samsung, who was declared innocent a few weeks ago of issues that stem all the way back to 2014, we're going to see his case as the penultimate case on what really counts as rich in Korea. Yes, in the dramas, you see the chaebol kids and the chaebol owners. They're running their companies, they're in their offices, they're yelling and screaming, they're going shopping, they're going to the hotels, they're going to their fancy apartments. But those things are literally just accoutrement. Does that really make people count as rich in Korea? And we've seen also in the news, in the real K-drama, a lot of people fronting, a lot of people faking their wealth. So really, and if you were going to be fooled by anybody in like a rented Rolls Royce, that is not rich. We're not talking about ordinary, hardworking wealth. We're talking about national level wealth. And usually in these cases of the chaebols, you're going to be hearing about like, okay, if you do get into a little bit of the weeds before you run away, you're like, I don't want to be in that kind of a gardening situation. You're going to be hearing about cross-shareholding as a mechanism to how they are so wealthy. And you're probably just like, okay, I don't know, whatever. Maybe I'm just going to focus on their cars and their expensive toys, and just call it a day. They're rich. But it doesn't really, answer any questions. And if you don't really kind of know what this whole murky thing about cross-shareholding is, it's not 100% unique to Korea, but it is very common in Korea. And it's also alluded to a bit in the K-dramas. So I wanted to go over cross-shareholding, the case of Samsung, and why it is okay. We're gonna go from why it is okay and why it is so not okay. The point here is to try to show why it makes sense to support the way that these chaebol owners are rich, and why it makes sense to criticize and try to stop the chaebol owners for being this rich. We have to look at it in the sense of like what people are doing on each side is a rational choice. If you just want the news and the conclusion of the news, Mr. Samsung was declared a couple weeks ago, after years of legal battles, not guilty of manipulating a merger. Mr. Samsung, Lee Jae-young, the third generation scion of the Samsung empire, was declared not guilty for manipulating a stock merger to, in simple terms, stay rich. Now, if you just look at it in the surface, you're not going to really learn anything. It's almost as if like saying like, well, the evidence of him cheating is not conclusive, so therefore he's 100% faithful. There were plenty of legitimate reasons why he had to go over that ho's house and replace the light bulb so often. You're not going to learn anything. Now, if you do want to learn anything, the lessons are in the sweet shade. And the shadiest part of this is kind of the most technical and boring part, so I'm going to try to make it interesting. But it's literally the cross-shareholding and this controversial merger in 2015 that also involves the president and remember her like cult leader friend who was convicted of bribery, and then a horse over in like for a daughter in Germany. See, so like once you add all of the other details, the real money hides behind all of those confusing facts. And we're talking about somebody's horse instead of talking about the real thing that makes people in Korea uber wealthy. Okay, so quick quiz. If Mr. Lee Jae-yong is like the wealthiest man in Korea, then he must have, true or false, a ton of stock, the most amount of stock in Samsung Electronics. That he must have 50% of the company, right? Not at all. At least as of 2019, because, I ain't digging into your, the most recent, don't accuse me of going into your bank account. This is just public information from like a think tank stuff, just for demonstrative purposes, but at least verified. 2019, 0.6%. Not even 1% of Samsung Electronics. And you're just like, okay, how does that work? Doesn't he even have any money? This is the empire. And he sits at the top, and he control, and is the top company Samsung Electronics. That's the first thing you gotta understand. It is not. It is this thing called Samsung C&T, which is basically like construction company. What? The first hurdle into understanding how real rich works in Korea is to get on the same page about what it means to actually own a company versus act like you're owning a company, which in Korean words is controlling a company. So that's why you'll see a lot of the times, yes, Samsung is the family controlled conglomerate of the Lee family, not owned, because it's a public company. It's not 100% owned, and like we said, it was like 0.6% owned. Nobody in that family owns more than 50%, literally, of looks like any entity of the Samsung empire, and yet they control the entire thing as if they do. If you make an analogy of this, it's sort of like if you want to live in a house and you don't have the money for 100% of the house, okay, you go to the bank, they'll loan you the money, you take out a mortgage, you make your payments, the bank actually owns it. And in a way, shouldn't they control it? But then there's like, you know what? You control the house. Yeah. I mean, you live in it. You decide what interior modifications you want. If you want to put in a security system, you control the house. But when you really look at it, you don't own the house. You have a little bit of equity in it, and the bank owns it. So in some ways, this control versus ownership is not completely foreign of a concept, but it gets very tricky, and you can manipulate a lot of it once you put it into this cross-sharing system. So let's take the bank out of the picture and go back to that house example, and let's say that like you have this house and you're like, okay, I've totally paid off this house, but I have no money. But hey, if I could sell off like 90% of this house, I would get, let's say it's like $1 million house. If I could sell off 90% of this house and I could get $900,000 if it's, and then all these people, sure, they can maybe come and go and live. And as long as, like, let's say I still have 10%, but then I sell it to like 50 people. So everybody has like, tiny percentages. So then really I'm still in charge, because even though I only own 10% of this house, nobody else can come close if we're gonna, vote based on who has the most amount of ownership. And so essentially that's the seed concept of how this cross-sharing works. The next concept of how this was unfair, how this was manipulated by the Samsung family in simple terms with that house, think about it this way. This is the main crux of it. Let's say that you have a tiny house, like a ADU unit that's maybe $100,000 that you bought, and you put it on somebody's big $10 million mansion. And then you said like, hey, to the mansion owner, let's combine these two properties under one entity and let's be owners 50-50. The owner of the mansion would be like, excuse me, what? Excuse me, that tiny house was just worth $100,000. You want to merge it into my $10 million mansion and then say you're 50-50% owner of the entire thing? So then suddenly you're like assets of $5 million? What? So that is the kind of reaction that a lot of people had towards what the Samsung family executed back in 2015 in this controversial merger that just got resolved 9 years later, a couple weeks ago, where they're like, no, not guilty. If you followed me this far, you might be asking, okay, I can see like if somebody is greedy, why they might want to like scam somebody into, taking an ADU unit and merging it with a multi-million dollar mansion and then going 50-50. That is not essentially what the Samsung family did. It's not, you have to kind of, now we're going to look at it from their perspective of why, even if they, in a perfect world, said like, yes, I did it for that purpose, but why it was reasonable, rational, why they had to do it, why maybe it was overall good for the Korean economy. The real rich, the real chaebol owners, they're acting not necessarily for money. Their goal is not to like have stuff. Their actual goal in their planning is power and control through a complicated set of ownership. In other words, how can I use the least amount of real cash to control an entire empire? And if these companies are generating cash, how do I, instead of like hoarding this cash to say like, okay, I'm gonna own more and more of this company, release this cash to then invest into other businesses without relinquishing control? One way to kind of think about it is that, yes, we're thinking like Samsung is so huge and big. All of this big empire took a lot of investment money. The second reason, and the bigger reason, I would say, the more emergency red light reason, are inheritance taxes, which are some of the highest in the world in Korea at 50% if you're at the top level, like these people. Now, you might think like, they're rich. They're so rich. Remember, again, it's not necessarily about the money for them, because actually, if they have to, let's say in the house example, you inherit a $1 million house and you have to pay 50% taxes, $500,000. Where are you going to get $500,000 if you didn't also inherit a bunch of cash to pay for the inheritance taxes? You're going to have to sell your house. You lose your house even though you inherited your house under a system where the inheritance taxes are so high. If you're thinking like now you're just going like Wikipediaing or Googling like in the United States, like in that case, there's an exemption. So for most middle class people in the United States, the tax, you're not going to lose your house by inheriting it most likely, but check with your financial advisor. But in Korea, a lot of times it's not just about your house, it's about the entire corporation, and the money is tied into the corporation. So a lot of these, and especially if you're a number one like Samsung, you are preparing decades in advance for the, Lee Jae-yong, like when he was young, like in the late 90s, 2000s, that's when they started preparing to pay their tax bill for when his father died. Yes. So, yeah, they did a lot. They did a lot. Where basically, like some calculations said that like they used maybe like $100,000 to $300,000 of actual money, and it boom, 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 like they were able to generate the equivalent of like $10 billion to pay the tax bill. Tax bill is about $10 billion, which ironically is his reported net worth. So if you didn't prepare, you'd have to like sell your entire stake. You may be left with nothing, and you just pay the taxes, and then you don't even control the company. So for this class of people, preparing to pay the inheritance tax is of utmost importance, and they will go through a lot of mechanics in order to be able to do that. And let's say, and it looks like in this situation, let's say they also have to prepare, hey, if we do have to sell off our stocks and risk losing control of the company, we're going to have to put up a plan B and a different method in order to maintain control. That is essentially where the money is. Why? Let's just take a pause. Why does controlling a conglomerate have more money than actual like the money or like your salary? It's not like, oh, I control the company, so I'm going to pay, all my family members like a high wage. Honey, that's not the way the real money is. We'll take one example from a different conglomerate. Let's say one very prestigious airline in Korea, also family controlled, also had a lot of controversy. Where there is some money to be made in controlling an empire, for example, like when you have like the in-flight duty free, all those sales that go through the airline's duty free program. Well, if you control the company, you can control which subsidiary or subcontractor handles that contract or does the work. And then if your relative is set up to have that company, or just even as a flow through, like what I've heard was like basically like 0.5% or 1% of all sales, there's a commission that goes to that family member that controls, one of the family members of the family that controls the airline. So there's like tons of little opportunities in that way that actually generate a lot of money. And that's where this real wealth starts to be created by controlling a conglomerate, even though you may not own 100% of it. So like if you own 100% of it, let's say like, you made like $1 billion in profits, then you can, say like, okay, we'll take the $1 billion in profits. Thank you very much. Sure, we'll leave it in the company and invest it. But if you only own like 1% of the company, like you're not going to take the actual profits. What you're taking essentially is the operations, the cut of all of the operations of the business, which is much more predictable, much more manageable, and in your pocket every month. That's where this wealth comes in terms of controlling it by your family. So back to the inheritance taxes, most of the times these conglomerate owners, their wealth is just tied up in the shares of the stocks, because if you get any money, you're always trying to buy more shares to make sure that you have more shares than anybody else in order to control. So you don't have a lot of free-flowing cash. You don't. So if you need to pay a bill, that's why you saw the Samsung family saying, like, okay, we're going to sell off our art, or we're going to donate it to the country. Like, they're just cutting all sorts of deals to try to find ways to pay this exorbitant tax bill. But, like I said, there's a plan B, or it could have been a plan A. I think it was a shucking and jiving. We're going to go over the shady timeline. If you want the shadiest theory, I'm going to save that to the end. We're just going to go over right now what the actual accused crime was by the Samsung family in order to keep control of the company. And it sounds so undramatic. It sounds so boring. But, oh my God. It's so interesting how it works. All right, nobody is just gonna like explain to you like this. Okay, all right. I told you. He who controls this company, actually I didn't really specify, but he who controls this company at the top controls the rest. You see what I'm saying? So, to simplify and to make it cheaper to control the entire empire, you just set up the rules where, like, well, if I own the most of this company at the top, then I control everybody else through reinvestments. So this company is going to invest into this company, and this company is going to invest into this company, and this company is going to invest into this company. And he who controls the biggest one at the top, and if it's like not that expensive to control, you win. You're the winner. So that was the whole point, to try to make sure, and it's not a fake company. Like sometimes there's like kind of like a real cheap holding company that has like doesn't really do anything. But this is kind of a construction company, so it actually does do things. And what they tried to do is make sure that that company is going to have the most amount of ownership percentage. So back in 2019, Lee Jae-yong's equity ratio was like 17%. They wanted to make sure that he held on as much as he could. So what is the most clever way to do that? Back to that multi-million-dollar mansion in the ADU unit example. If you're going to merge the two and then go like twinsies or splitsies or whatever, find the ADU that you own the most of and then merge it. So that is the accusation that they are under. That when they wanted to merge Cheil Industries, Cheil, and Samsung C&T, the people who are like in Samsung C&T, if they're like in the mansion, they're just like, and they bought into it, they're just like, no, we don't want that 80. No, that's so unfair. Because you know what, guys, if you had one share of Cheil and after the merger, you got basically almost 3 shares of Samsung C&T. See what I'm saying? You get 3 shares of the company that owns the entire thing. And then who owned the most of Cheil? It was the Samsung family. So they were able to triple the shares, the equivalent, into the controlling company. So that's really unfair to the investors of C&T. That's where the conflict was. And that's where the lawsuits were. And that's where the corruption came in. So because there were people with skin in the game, that's why Samsung was called out on it. If not, this would have been so easy to do. Samsung C&T, there was some of the people who were so against it. There's like one activist investor, like a hedge fund from overseas. They're saying like, hey, if we do this, our investment just plummets. I mean, it just becomes worth less because look, now we're going to have to split with this ADU unit. Then, not only that, the National Pension Service, which is essentially like Korea's Social Security, the fund. So in order to fund like Social Security in Korea, this entity invests all around the world and also in Korean companies. And they at first were just like, no, this is not good because, we got to pay off the pensions for people, and you merge this, then our investment goes down. You're going to be hurting the National Pension Service. So they were against it. So there is evidence of people who looked at this deal and said that economically, it don't make sense. Sort of like, realistically, that hoe don't need your man to go over there to fix her light bulbs. This is not legit. So this was in 2015. Let's say the first half of 2015, people arguing because they want to get this merger done in 2015. And then by July, it was done. They say, hey, and then the National Pension Service said, okay, fine, we approve this merger. So on the surface, you could be like, okay, well, even the National Pension Service said that, like, he ain't cheating, the light bulb needed fixing, so it's okay. So then you're just like, well, what's the big deal? Well, this is where then even the president at the time got slappily involved because it was basically, actually, there was a conviction that the president, through her assistant or, one of the ministers, but they're just assistants, but, through an ajashi who's like, important, has some title, went to the National Pension Service and said like, look, you better approve this freaking deal, approve this freaking merger, and pressured the National Pension Service, basically blackmailed them into saying, okay, fine, yes, Samsung, merge this, it's okay. Even if grandma is gonna have less of a check, fine, take it. Why did they have so much pressure? They're saying that actually it was proven that Samsung paid a bribe to President Park Geun-hye's best friend. Yeah. About $7 million. So, hey, only $7 million and you get the $1 billion result. So, because of that, actually, Lee Jae-yong, the guy who's running Samsung now, inherited Samsung, controlling Samsung, won officially as of 2 weeks ago, went to jail for a year and a half for this bribery scandal because it was proven by prosecutors. So the nation of Korea said like, yep, he bribed. Because, some of this stuff was so shady. It was like, they bribed the best friend, right? But how'd they do it? The best friend had that daughter, remember that crazy girl in Germany who's living overseas, and she's like, my horse is so expensive. And then Samsung was like, okay, we'll cut a deal. We'll pretend we have an equestrian team overseas that we're funding, and we'll essentially funnel money. And then I guess there was some other, not just a horse maintenance. I don't think it's that expensive, even though it's expensive. And so there were other avenues where this money was sent. And so, yes, President Park Geun-hye, impeachment, jailing, this was integral to that. So when you're thinking well, how did this, fit in? Does this boring kind of merger fit into? This was the seed of a lot of the reasons why she got impeached and what was able to be proven, he may be cheating with, 12 girls, but maybe you can only prove 2. So this is some of the ones that they were able to really kind of, see where the evidence was and convicted and then sent to jail. But on the other hand, how did Samsung just on the surface say hey, this is legitimate? Because of course, if you're going to be trying to pull this thing and say that there is nothing illegal here, then you got to have a good story. And they had a good story. Oh, yes, they had a good story. That's a good story. First of all, though, you got to be suspicious. Before you hear their good story and their sweet talking, remember this. Why would a construction company, yes, the Samsung C&T, merge with Cheil, which is an amusement park and also textile clothing company that also owns some biotech? Okay. First of all, there's just like, it's for company synergy. It makes sense, to make an affiliate. Does that really make sense? But they said that it made sense. All right, so now this is where the magic worked. Because let's go back to that example of the to $10 million mansion owner being like, why would I merge your ADU unit onto my property and then go 50-50? Why? Well, what if the ADU unit guy said like, well, you know what? It may look like a small ADU, but there's like 5 Monet paintings in there. It ups the value. It's worth this acquisition. And not only that, there is like another entity, like there's, let's say like a bucket of gold bars. So essentially that's what Samsung said. They're like, okay, yes, Cheil is merging with Samsung C&T, but you forget that Cheil, the company that they're merging with, well, we own Samsung Biologics, this amazing biotech company. And this amazing biotech company, Samsung Biologics, also owns Samsung Bioepis, which does amazing things, that has a ton of revenue and revenue potential. So they were accused, they being the masterminds of this plot, of inflating the accounting of the Samsung Biologics, like saying like, they make so much money, dude, like, or saying like, this Monet is so expensive in this ADU, dude. Well, yeah, there's like 5 real Monets, but then they were just like from the poster palace, in the mall. They're just like, what? And yet it went through at that valuation. So that was the big thing that justified why you would have that ratio. So that was the ratio. Like, why would you get 3 shares in the new company? And they did it sneaky too. To make it clearer, I said 3, right? But really, they're just like, 0.35 shares of Cheil equals 1 share of Samsung C&T. So psychologically already, that makes it seem like, then it seems smaller on Cheil's side. No, that basically means that they're gonna triple, their shares in the new company. So the National Pension Service was mad, but they capitulated because of President Park Geun-hye's shady antics through her cult leader best friend, who had a daughter who needed a horse over in Germany. And then overseas investors were pissed. Also, people in Korea are pissed. They're just saying like, that my retirement is in there, and you're, devaluing my money in order for you to have control. So that's kind of the crux of where there's the fight. If you are an investor, if you have skin in the game, or even if you're looking at this as such an unfair manipulation and special privileges, then it's so unfair what they're doing here. On the other hand, if you look at from the Samsung family's perspective, that 50% inheritance tax from the beginning, just simply put, is unfair. And if that wasn't the case, a lot of these shenanigans probably wouldn't be taking place and manipulating, just to kind of give them a little bit of credit for, they have to do what they have to do. And then overall, I will say there is a huge bit of acceptance by the Korean public to, as long as they're not being personally affected immediately, to support Samsung and to support the major companies and conglomerates, because it is national strength, national reputation, national pride, national power, and a ton of jobs. And until as well, I don't like to throw in too much culturally, like, oh, this is because Koreans are this way, but just a little bit until there is a different type of accepted leadership model that is non-family based in Korea. This will continue to happen because in general, I think people in Korea are comfortable and accept that succession should come through a family line. In some ways, it is easier, less chaos, because there is no succession battle. If you look at any kind of case studies of management in big corporations, or there's chaos that can harm a company whenever there's always a battle for power internally. And not to say that there's not a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes at Samsung, but at least that biggest part of it is resolved if you just say like, okay, the family is going to decide among themselves which kid is going to inherit the title of the leader of the entire empire, and we're just going to move on from there. And until that changes, you're going to see the Korean public support in some way, tacit or otherwise, even though there is some sort of division, they're going to support this, the messy part of family transfer of ownership, because it makes their life more stable. All right, so I said that there's going to be a little bit of like the real shady story at the end. Well, this is what I'm thinking was a little bit shady, because like now that we have hindsight with the timeline, I think nowadays looking at a lot of this, looking at a lot of true crime, timeline reveals a lot. And I would say that yes, this merger, paying the inheritance taxes, had been set in motion as a plan by the Samsung family for decades. But I don't think they were ready. They didn't get enough money prepared when the father of Lee Jae-yong passed away. Now, the reason why I paused there is that there, in some circles, is a debate on when he really did pass away, and if it wasn't the way that the Samsung family reported to the official media, that would be the biggest heist, or like we got away with, I think, in the history of Korea. Like pretending your father is still alive when he dead, in order to delay the tax bill, because if you had to pay it right away, you'd lose control of the entire empire. You see where I'm going with this? So in 2014, in May, that's when the second generation, basically the father, Lee Geun-hye, went into the hospital and because he had like a stroke, and then he went into a coma. And then he went into a coma where he never reappeared. There was like one or two instances where I think people saying like, oh yeah, he did appear, but it seemed like it was doctored. But he had never made a public appearance. He never reappeared after he got admitted into the hospital in May of 2014. And officially, he passed away. They had the funeral in October of 2020. So this is the timeline we're looking at here. May 2014 to October 2020. So by this time in 2014, President Park and her friend, who's like in all the meetings, imagine like if there is like, Joe Biden's best friend just in all the Oval Office meetings and going on overseas trips, writing his speeches, doing the most, telling Joe Biden to like eat fruit because, it just came up from the kitchen, which, okay, now I think a lot of people are y'all saying like, that probably does happen. But imagine this kind of a situation, full swing, drunk on power. The 2018 Olympics are coming up, so there's tons of places for President Park's coterie and entourage to be shaking down the corporate world for money. May 2014, I think this is the crisis point over at Samsung, is that the leader had a health emergency and then went into a coma, and they weren't ready to pay the tax bill for this inheritance. So in 2015, we're seeing that this merger is being pushed through, and I think a little bit desperately, and it looks like Samsung is kind of being a little bit more aggressive and cutting corners around here because it is a desperate situation. If they don't find this solution to create a merger in order to then have enough control over the company, then sell off whatever assets they need to pay off the tax bill, then that Samsung empire can be in dire straits. And looking at it even from the government's perspective, the government does not want an unstable Samsung either. So in some ways you get some coordination there. And obviously, yeah, he had to go to jail. He, as in Lee Jae-yong, had to go to jail for it. And then also the person from President Park Geun-hye's team who pressured the National Pension Service had to go to jail for 2.5 years. President Park Geun-hye went to jail. So it's not as if they didn't go to jail for this and was, So then in October 2020, you had the official funeral. Whether he had been buried or cremated years before, we'll leave that up to the sleuths. But I thought that was just it was a little suspicious. Then in 2021, Lee Jae-yong was released on parole, and then in August of 2022, he was pardoned by President Yoon Suk-yeol. Then a few months later, in October, he had been officially appointed as chairman of Samsung Electronics. Of course, he was always the person most in control with ownership shares of the entire empire because he owned more of the Samsung C&T. But officially appointed to Samsung, when is he just gonna keep, everybody knows he's the leader, but he still got this title as vice chairman, So October 22, that's when he said all right, he's the big man. And there you go. That's it was a little bit odd. And yes, there was the timing. If you're just thinking really, did he bribe them with the horse? Well, the merger went through July 2015. When did payments for the horsey start? September 2015. Okay. They delivered. Horsey got her oats. All right, guys, what do you think? So, you think that is essentially real rich in Korea? Okay. Do all this stuff, and then in the end, you are declared innocent. You still have control over the empire, and you still even went to jail in between for being guilty of a portion of it. So, it could be the guy said I never went over to her house to replace the light bulbs, and then it was proven that, you did go over to that house to replace her light bulbs, and then get punished for lying. But then they're but there's not really, we can't really say that you did anything more than replace her light bulbs. Yeah. And now they married. So that's essentially the situation here. That's really kind of real wealth in Korea in this context. This narrow context, even though it went all wild over the place. That's why Korean dramas are so rich and full of stuff, because even if they take a little bit of a slice, there's a lot going on there. So hopefully that gives a little bit more of clarity to how real rich Korean people are rich in Korea because of controlling their empires through this cross-shareholding system. Put your comments below, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you again next time, guys. Bye-bye.